Welcome, dear students. This session focuses on what becomes Australian English. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand how and in what ways Australian English was shaped. Well, my dear students, Australia is a young nation, but its Aboriginal population, had been living there since long. They had been living there for thousands of years. In fact, if we trace the history of language in Australia, it's very interesting that the time span that English has had there is very limited as compared to the languages that existed here through the past. Just to give an example, what I would say is, if the 40,000 years of the total history of language on this land, if we compress it to a time span of 24 hours, on the scale of that 24 hours, the time that the English language has spent there is only 7 minutes. So in comparison to 24 hours, if you look at 7 minutes, of course, the existence of English language in the Australian area is very limited. Archaeological evidence suggests that the first Aborigines migrated from Southeast Asia to Australia. Among themselves, the indigenous people do not have a uniform name but accept the term Aborigines, derived from Latin word aborigine, meaning from the beginning. So these were the settlers here from the very beginning. The first Aboriginal loanword in English was appropriately the word kangaroo, that is, Australia is famous for, and today it's a national symbol of Australia as well. It was recorded by the naturalist Joseph Banks, actually in 1770. Captain Cook, who, went there on the first voyage, he also has recorded in his history that there is a strange hopping animal here, and natives call it kangaroo or kangaroo. In the language that the first expedition encountered, kangaroo was the name for one particular species of kangaroo, actually, which became the name of all, the animals, of that particular, species, and it became a generic name. So, like within monkeys, we have different species and they would have different names. In the same way, within different types of kangaroos, this kangaroo was the name for one type of species, but later on, it was used as a generic name for all. Most Aboriginal loanwords refer to the Australian fauna and flora, such as the small yellow-green parrot, budgerigar, the wild dog, dingo, the arboreal, marsupial. These are all the names that come from, the ancient languages that were being used in that area, and Australian English borrowed them. If you travel to Australia, it's very fascinating to read the road signs that you would find there, because these road signs are a mixture of Anglo-Saxon names and, like Liverpool and Newcastle, because, people from Britain went to Australia and got settled there. So, of course, they took with them English and they took with them names that they preferred to name the roads or, areas there. But you would also find some Aboriginal names like Wagga Wagga or Indurupilli. So these are, the kind of combinations that you would find on the roads as the names of roads, which shows, the historical perspective, which gives us a historical perspective on the language, how, both the languages belong to this area. The white settlement in Australia was disastrous for both the population or for the languages when we look at it from the perspective that as English came, both the English people and the English language, they took over the local people and the local languages. So, gradually the local flavor of Australia, it was lost on the way. Today, the Aborigines number less than 400,000, and many of them speak English only. So, their native language is lost on the way. Among the surviving Australian Aboriginal languages, about 50 are in active first language used, mostly in the places that are away from the center. Again, this is a big continent that is huge area, it is covering a huge area. So, the urban areas, the metropolitan areas, the areas that are closer to the center, there, there is more influence of English. Only in the far-flung areas, far-off areas, you would find that the native languages still are, surviving, or they are just trying to survive. It is feared that it will not be long before most of these languages would be dead, because gradually, with the passage of time, English is taking over. Rather, I would say after, the Second World War, the speed has increased and English is very rapidly taking over these languages. And even the young speakers of these languages, now most of them can only speak English. In the new generations, it is lost. In Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, there is little regional variation in language, in fact. And what we find is that, a standard language is used. But social and ethnic variations do exist. Different ethnic groups would use different varieties. And also in terms of social strata, the classification on the social ladder would refer to different, options of varieties. Some speakers use a broader accent, that is one that is remote from RP, that is the British received pronunciation, the British standard pronunciation, and they use more local Australian words in their vocabulary. So, they use the syntax of this British English and bring in, words from their local vocabulary, but similar variations are found all over the country. Overall, what I would say is, today, Australia is in the inner circle. What do I mean by that is, I hope, Kachuro's model of, expansion of English through the world. And what he says is that there are three types of countries. The countries where English is spoken as a first language, where it is spoken as a second language, and where it is spoken as a foreign language. The inner circle is the circle of only those few countries where it is spoken as a first language. And today, interestingly, Australia is one of those countries.